Have you ever asked God for a sign? Has God ever given you a sign without you asking? For many people with faith, that's a pretty familiar experience, to have signs. I'm lucky because I get to hear a lot of those stories. And I have stories of my own, too. And they're all different. For some people, it's a butterfly being there at the exact right moment, or finding dimes everywhere they look. Or maybe it's a song that plays on the radio at just the perfect time. Whatever it is, those signs help us to know that we're on the right path, that we can trust that things are going to turn out. The tragedy that we experienced as a community in April was something that requires so many signs to be able to move forward. I'm speaking of the death of Logan Penzabene in the car accident. His family has told me about some of the signs that they have experienced since then. His dad, Frank, always had a thing with crows. They weren't necessarily his favorite bird, but they were just there at some really important times in his life, and he noticed it. The day they got the call about the accident, Frank walked outside, and there was a crow, crowing and crowing and crowing. A few days later, they were having a meeting at St. Agnes Cemetery. They, of course, didn't have a plan for where they would bury their son, so they were unsure if they were making the right decision to go to Albany, where the family plot was. But as they walked in to the building, there on a tree was a crow. And that crow was saying, "Ma, Ma, Ma." And they said they knew they were in the right place. It's happened in the extended family too. Their Aunt Patty, who's watching in Florida now, has an amazing story of kayaking with her daughter, Logan's cousin, and getting into a kind of dangerous situation without realizing it. And there was a crow, not native to Florida, cawing away. And those signs help them to know that all is well. So have you asked God for signs like that? I can tell looking at your faces that you have your own stories too of signs. But the gospel today is telling us signs are great and we should rely on them. We should turn to them. But that's not the end of the story. We need to go beyond just looking for signs and let God get a little more involved in our lives than just that. The story is very dramatic today. It's unbelievable to think of these disciples, the one time that Jesus is away from them, the one time he went off on his own. They're in this boat, and the storm is so bad that they know they could die. The boat is taking on water, and they know that they're in serious danger. So then when they see someone walking to them on the water, their fear doesn't allow them to have any hope that this is good. They think it's a ghost. And Jesus says, "Don't be afraid. It's me." But they can barely believe it. And so this would be a perfect time for Peter to say, "Lord, if it's you, give me a sign. Give me a sign so that I can know." But he doesn't say that. Instead, he says, "Lord, if it's you, give me a command. Tell me to do something and I'll do it. Give me a command." A lot of us ask God for signs, but Peter is asking us to take it to the next level and ask for a command. There's a word we have for that in the spiritual life. It's called surrender. Surrendering to God's will. And if you're thinking about doing that, be careful. Because if you do, you don't know what God is going to say next. The people who have surrendered to God, and I know that there's many of them here now, they have incredible stories of what God told them to do when they really surrendered. Some of them say that God said, "That job you're in is a dead end. It's time to get out. I know it's comfortable, but you don't belong there anymore." Other people have told me that God told them, it's time to stop drinking. That's got to be in your past. No more. Leave that behind. Other people have told me that God has said, that relationship you're in, it's not good for you, and it's not going anywhere. You need to get out. If we invite God to lead our lives, if we really surrender, God is going to take us out of our comfort zone. But that's when we need to recognize that God sees things that we don't see. God knows about opportunities that we do not, and God has a perspective way bigger than ours. There is usually something that happens before we surrender, and it happens in this story in the gospel, and it happens pretty much to all of us. Before we're willing to surrender, the boat that we are sailing in needs to start taking on water. There's no reason to surrender if things are going okay. We start to think that we're in charge. But when things are not going okay, when we start to realize that that boat that we've been relying on is actually going to take us down, that's when we might be willing to say, God, nothing's working right now. Everything that's worked up until now is falling apart. I need you. Give me a command, and I'll do it. So let's start by having the courage to just ask this simple question. What boat am I riding in that I need to get off of? What is a boat in my life that is taking on water? And it's worked for me up until now, but I've got to be honest, this is not working anymore. I'm in more danger in the boat than I am walking on the water. It's a question that all of us have to ask. It takes courage to do this, but that's exactly what Jesus is telling us to do today. You heard him say, take courage. It's me. Don't be afraid. Look at who you're surrendering to. Look at who you're putting your trust in. This is not that big a risk. It feels like it. But remember who I am. You can trust in me. I heard a fact recently that helped me to understand how we could muster the courage for this. It was a fact about airplanes and how they age. All of us want to fly on new, young, modern airplanes. We don't want to get on an old airplane. But I found out that the way that the age of an airplane is calculated is different than just years. The age of the airplane, engineers say, is not calculated in the number of years it's existed. It all depends on the amount of time it's spent on the ground. Because planes do not age as they're flying. They age on the ground. It's on the ground where supposedly they're safe that they start to rust, that they start to corrode, that the weight and the pull of gravity against the ground pushing up on them starts to wear their joints. Planes were made to fly. So they don't have a hard time if they have lots of miles in the air. Lots of time spent flying is perfect because they're engineered to fly. The thing that ages a plane is staying safely on the ground too long. The same is true for us. We need to recognize when we need to get out of the boat. Because our engineer is talking to us today. The one who designed and made us is saying, you were not made to stay in a sinking boat. That will take you down. You need to have the courage to surrender. And we hear that Peter would have drowned in that boat, but he was made to walk on water. And so are we.